Growing up in our household felt like playing a rigged game. No matter how hard I tried, no matter what I achieved, Ethan always came out ahead. Not because he worked harder or deserved it, but because my parents made it so. My father, Richard, and my mother, Claire, seemed to orbit around Ethan as if he were the sun, while I was just another planet in the system, overlooked and insignificant. Ethan could do no wrong. That was the unspoken rule. When I brought home straight A's, my father would grumble about how I should be aiming higher, maybe taking on extra credit. But when Ethan barely scraped by with CS, it was a celebration, a testament to his supposed genius and raw potential. It was a joke, but no one was laughing, least of all me. I remember one summer when we were kids, I accidentally broke a vase while chasing Ethan around the house. My parents didn't even bother asking who was at fault. "Why weren't you more careful, Michael?" my mother snapped, ignoring the fact that Ethan had been the one barreling into furniture like a wrecking ball. He just stood there, smirking as I got the blame. The years passed, but the pattern never changed. High school? Same story. My parents were too busy applauding Ethan's mediocre basketball games to notice that I'd been accepted into the honors program. College? Forget about it. My acceptance into a prestigious university was overshadowed by Ethan's decision to take a gap year, to find himself. That gap year, of course, stretched into a permanent state of idleness, punctuated only by my parents' financial bailouts. While I worked my way through school, juggling part-time jobs and internships to stay afloat, Ethan coasted through life, dropping out of community college and cycling through one failed business venture after another. His latest scheme, an online sneaker store, collapsed after 6 months, leaving my parents out thousands of dollars in loans they'd naively co-signed. "Ethan's trying," my mother would say whenever I brought up his failures. "He just needs more support." And what about me? I once asked, my frustration boiling over. Do I not deserve support for the things I've accomplished? "Michael, you're self-sufficient," my father replied dismissively. "You don't need us the way Ethan does." That was their justification, their excuse for years of neglect and enabling. It didn't matter that I had worked tirelessly to build a stable career, or that I'd sacrificed so much to get where I was. In their eyes, Ethan was the one who needed nurturing, while I was just expected to handle everything on my own. But even as I resented them, I couldn't shake the guilt. I wanted to be the good son, the reliable one, the one who didn't make waves. I convinced myself that if I worked hard enough, if I achieved enough, they would finally see my worth. It was a losing battle, but it was the only one I knew how to fight. The breaking point came when I landed my first major promotion. It was a big deal. A milestone I had worked years to reach. I invited my parents out to dinner to celebrate, hoping, foolishly, that this would be the moment they finally recognized my efforts. They showed up late, as usual, my father muttering some excuse about traffic while my mother gushed about Ethan's latest business idea. When I tried to steer the conversation back to my promotion, they barely acknowledged it. "Good for you, Michael," my mother said, her tone distracted. "But did you hear about Ethan's pitch to investors? It's groundbreaking." Groundbreaking. That word stuck with me, echoing in my mind as I sat there, watching them fawn over my brother's latest pipe dream. I realized then that no matter what I did, it would never be enough. They had made their choice a long time ago. That night, I resolved to stop trying to win their approval. I would carve out my own path, far away from their toxic dynamic. If they couldn't see my worth, then I would stop looking for validation in their blind eyes. But even as I made that decision, I couldn't shake the bitterness that had taken root in my heart. Years of neglect and favoritism had left scars that ran deep, and no amount of success could erase them. My relationship with my parents, and with Ethan, was a wound that would never fully heal. And yet, despite everything, I still wanted to believe that things could change. That one day, they might see me for who I was, not just as Ethan's overshadowed brother. But hope, I had learned, was a dangerous thing. It kept you tethered to people who didn't deserve your loyalty, pulling you back into the very pain you were trying to escape. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I would ever truly break free. Meeting Lily was like stepping into a beam of sunlight after years of living in shadow. She had this infectious energy about her, The kind that made you feel like you were the most important person in the room just by being near her. I met her during one of my rare, reluctant attempts to reconnect with Ethan. He dragged me to a party. One of those obnoxiously loud gatherings he loved, filled with people who seemed to revolve around him, just like my parents always had. I wasn't planning on staying long. The plan was simple. Show up, make an appearance, and leave before Ethan roped me into one of his harebrained schemes. But then, there she was, Lily. She was standing by the makeshift bar, laughing at some joke I couldn't hear. Her laugh was the kind that made you want to laugh along, even if you didn't know what was funny. "Michael, meet Lily," Ethan said, clapping me on the back like we were best friends. "She's the smartest person here. Don't let that fool you, though. She's fun too." I braced myself for whatever angle Ethan was working, but Lily didn't seem like the type to fall for his charm. She turned to me, her eyes sparkling with curiosity, and extended her hand. "Nice to meet you, Michael. Is Ethan always this full of himself?" I laughed, caught off guard. "Only when he's awake." From that moment, the party faded into the background. Lily and I talked for hours, about everything and nothing. She was sharp and witty, with a warmth that drew people in. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about Ethan or my parents or the endless cycle of favoritism that had defined my life. I was just me, and she seemed to like that version of me. Over the next few months, Lily and I grew closer. She was everything I didn't know I needed. Supportive, independent, and endlessly kind. She saw me in a way no one else ever had. Not as Ethan's overshadowed brother or my parents' overlooked son, but as a person with his own worth. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. But as our relationship blossomed, the tension with my family only grew. My parents, predictably, found ways to belittle what we had. "She's sweet, but are you sure she's the one?" my mother asked during one particularly painful dinner. "You've always been so practical, Michael. Don't rush into anything." Rush? Lily and I had been together for 2 years by that point. I was as sure about her as I had ever been about anything. But their doubts weren't about Lily, they were about me. In their eyes, I wasn't capable of making good decisions. I wasn't Ethan, after all. Ethan, of course, had his own way of stirring the pot. He took an unusual interest in Lily, going out of his way to charm her whenever we were all in the same room. At first, I thought he was just being his usual, attention-seeking self. But there were moments, fleeting but unmistakable, when I caught him looking at her in a way that made my stomach churn. "Ethan's harmless," Lily said when I brought it up. "He's your brother. Don't overthink it." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that Ethan, despite everything, wouldn't cross that line. He was self-centered and reckless, but surely even he had boundaries. Or so I thought. On our 4th anniversary, I proposed to Lily. It wasn't a grand gesture. No elaborate setups or public spectacles. Just the two of us, sitting on a park bench where we'd shared countless conversations. I pulled out the ring, my hands shaking slightly, and asked her to marry me. She said yes without hesitation, her eyes brimming with tears. In that moment, I felt like I had finally won something. Something Ethan or my parents couldn't take away from me. We began planning the wedding together, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of hope. This was my fresh start, my chance to build a life free from the toxicity of my family. Lily was my anchor, the person who made me believe in the possibility of happiness. But life, as I would soon learn, has a cruel sense of humor. My family's interference never stopped, and Ethan's interest in Lily grew more unsettling by the day. He'd find excuses to drop by unannounced or corner her at family gatherings, his charm dialed up to an almost absurd degree. I brushed it off, convincing myself that he was just being Ethan, obnoxious and attention-hungry. Looking back, I realized now how blind I was. The red flags were there, waving frantically in the wind, but I was too caught up in my own optimism to see them. I had spent my entire life fighting to prove my worth to my parents, to carve out a space for myself in a family that had always dismissed me. And now, with Lily by my side, I thought I had finally won. I couldn't have been more wrong. The year leading up to our wedding was supposed to be one of the happiest times of my life. Instead, It felt like I was trying to hold together a crumbling foundation with my bare hands. Between long hours at work, wedding planning, and the endless meddling from my family, the stress was relentless. But none of that prepared me for the real storm brewing just beneath the surface. At first, I didn't notice the changes in Lily. She was always on her phone, but wasn't everyone these days? She'd smile at texts, sometimes laugh softly to herself, but when I asked what was so funny, she'd brush it off with a casual, "Oh, just Emma," referring to her younger sister. She started coming home later, blaming work deadlines or errands that never seemed to end. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. After all, this was Lily, the woman who had made me feel valued for the first time in my life. She wouldn't lie to me. She wouldn't betray me. But the signs kept piling up. One night, I found her phone on the kitchen counter, buzzing with a notification. It was an unsaved number, and the message preview read, "Can't wait to see you again." My heart stopped. When she walked into the room, I handed her the phone. "Who's this?" I asked, my voice as steady as I could manage. She glanced at the screen, her face carefully neutral. "It's work-related," she said, slipping the phone into her pocket. "Just a client." I didn't press further. Maybe I should have, but I didn't want to be that guy. The insecure fiancé digging through his partner's messages. Trust was the cornerstone of our relationship, or so I thought. But the distance between us grew. Our conversations became strained, her laughter less frequent. She was physically present, but emotionally miles away. When I mentioned it, she'd wave it off, blaming wedding stress or exhaustion. And every time, I let it go, convincing myself that things would get better once the wedding was behind us. Then came the bombshell. It was a quiet Friday evening, one of the rare nights when we were both home. I had planned to order takeout and spend the evening going over some final wedding details. Lily, however, seemed distracted, her gaze distant as she sat across from me at the dining table. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I set down my pen, my stomach tightening. "What is it?" She hesitated, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I'm pregnant." For a brief, fleeting moment, I felt a surge of joy. This could be it, the fresh start we needed, the thing that would bring us closer together. But her next words shattered that illusion. "It's not yours." I stared at her, uncomprehending. The words didn't make sense. Not mine? How could that be? She looked away, tears streaming down her face. "It's Ethan's." Time seemed to stop. My brain struggled to process what I had just heard. Ethan, my brother, the one person I had spent my entire life trying to escape, only to have him infiltrate the one part of my life that was supposed to be mine and mine alone. "How long?" I finally managed to ask, my voice hollow. She wiped at her tears, her hands trembling. "Since the engagement party," she admitted. "It was a mistake, Michael. I swear. I didn't mean for it to happen." A mistake. That word echoed in my mind, mocking me. This wasn't a mistake. It was a betrayal of the highest order. My brother and my fiancé, the two people I should have been able to trust most in the world, had destroyed everything. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need air," I muttered, grabbing my jacket and heading for the door. "Michael, wait," Lily called after me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but it did little to clear the storm raging in my mind. Images of Ethan and Lily together flashed unbidden, each one more painful than the last. How could they do this to me? How could she look me in the eye every day, knowing what she had done? I ended up at the park where I had proposed to her, sitting on the same bench where she had said yes. The memory of that moment felt like a cruel joke now, a lie wrapped in a fleeting moment of happiness. When I finally returned home, hours later, Lily was waiting for me, her face pale and drawn. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Then why did you?" I asked, my voice raw with pain. She had no answer, only more tears. I went to bed that night, but sleep didn't come. My mind was a carousel of anger, hurt, and betrayal. This wasn't just about Lily's actions. It was about Ethan, about my family, about a lifetime of being overshadowed and undermined. This was the culmination of years of resentment, all boiling over into one catastrophic moment. I knew things would never be the same. This wasn't something I could forgive or forget. My world had crumbled, and the people I thought I could trust had been the ones to strike the first blow. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? My mind was consumed by the weight of Lily's confession. Every time I closed my eyes, her words echoed in my head. It's Ethan's. The next morning, I woke up, not because of rest, but because of sheer exhaustion, and found Lily sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and her eyes swollen from crying. I didn't speak to her. I couldn't. The sight of her stirred a cocktail of emotions: anger, betrayal, heartbreak. I walked past her, grabbed a mug of coffee, and stood by the window, staring out at nothing. "I know you hate me," she said softly, breaking the silence. I didn't turn around. "You're not wrong." She sniffled, her voice trembling. "I need to explain." "Explain what?" I snapped, spinning to face her. "Explain how you ended up in bed with my brother? Explain how you kept it from me for months? Explain why I was the last to know." My voice rose with each question, years of buried frustration finally erupting. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "That night, I don't know what I was thinking. Ethan kept telling me, 'Don't you dare.'" I cut her off, my voice like ice. "Don't you dare try to put this on him." She flinched, but I wasn't done. "I get it. Ethan's charming, right? Always has been. My parents fell for it. Everyone does. But you? You were supposed to be different. You were supposed to love me." My voice cracked, and I hated myself for the vulnerability seeping through. "I do love you," she pleaded, standing up. "I made a mistake, Michael, but I never stopped loving you." I laughed bitterly. "A mistake is spilling coffee. What you did was deliberate." "Repeated. You made your choice, Lily. Now you have to live with it." The conversation ended there. I grabbed my keys and left, needing to get away from her before I said something I couldn't take back. But there was someone else I needed to confront. Ethan. I found him at my parents' house, lounging on the couch like he didn't have a care in the world. He was scrolling through his phone, completely oblivious to the storm brewing outside. The sight of him sitting there, so smug and comfortable, made my blood boil. He looked up as I entered, a lazy grin spreading across his face. "Michael, what brings you here?" I didn't answer. I walked straight up to him, grabbed his shirt collar, and yanked him to his feet. "You son of a—" I spat, my voice trembling with rage. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," he said, throwing up his hands. "What's your problem?" "My problem?" I snarled. "You slept with Lily. My fiancée. My fiancé, Ethan." My voice echoed through the room, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "It was a mistake," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "A mistake?" I shoved him backward, my fists clenched. "You've been doing this since the engagement party, and you have the nerve to call it a mistake?" "She came to me," he said, his voice defensive. "She was the one who—" "Don't you dare put this on her," I interrupted. "You've spent your whole life taking whatever you wanted, no matter who it hurt. But this is too far, even for you." "What do you want me to say?" he shot back, his voice rising. "I'm sorry, all right? I screwed up. But maybe if you'd been a better fiancé." That was it. The final straw. I lunged at him, my fist connecting with his jaw before he could finish his sentence. He stumbled back, clutching his face, but I didn't care. Years of frustration, anger, and resentment came pouring out in that single moment. "Boys, stop it." My mother's voice cut through the chaos as she rushed into the room, my father trailing behind her. "Michael, what's gotten into you?" she demanded, her eyes darting between me and Ethan. "What's gotten into me?" I shouted. "Ask him. Ask your precious golden child what he's done." My father frowned, his expression a mix of confusion and irritation. "What are you talking about?" I turned to my parents, my chest heaving. "Ethan slept with Lily. She's pregnant. With his child." The room fell silent. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. My father just stood there, his face blank as he processed the words. Michael, my mother began, her voice soft and tentative. Ethan made a mistake. You can't let this ruin your relationship with your brother. I stared at her, disbelief coursing through me. A mistake? That's all you have to say? He's destroyed my life. And you want me to forgive him? He's your brother, she said firmly. Family is more important than anything. You need to support each other. Support him? I laughed bitterly. I've spent my entire life supporting him, and look where it's gotten me. Michael, my father said, his tone stern. This is a private matter. Don't drag the family into your personal problems. I shook my head, the weight of their words crushing me. Of course. Always defending Ethan. Always excusing him. I'm done. With him. With you. With all of this. I turned and walked out, ignoring their calls for me to come back. My heart felt like it was being ripped apart, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay. Not with them. Not with Lily. Not in this toxic web that had ensnared me for far too long. When I walked out of my parents' house that day, I knew it wasn't just a temporary storm. It was a severing of ties, a clean break from the people who had spent a lifetime proving I didn't matter as much as Ethan. Cutting off my family should have felt freeing, like escaping a cage. Instead, it felt like ripping out a part of myself and leaving it to bleed. The first few days were a blur. I packed up what little energy I had and moved into a modest apartment on the other side of the city. The silence was deafening. No Lily waiting for me when I got home. No calls from my parents, not that I expected any. They'd made it clear whose side they were on. The solitude quickly turned into a spiral. I stopped answering calls from the few friends who tried to check on me. I didn't eat much, and when I did, it was takeout left half-finished on the counter. Sleep was a distant memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. Ethan's smug grin, Lily's tear-streaked cheeks, my parents' cold indifference. It all replayed on an endless loop, tormenting me. The texts and voicemail started soon after. My mother's voice, pleading and insistent. Michael, this is your family. You can't just walk away. Call me back. My father's more curt. Enough of this drama. Come home and work this out like an adult. And Ethan's, predictably, oozing insincerity. Hey man, I get that you're mad, but we're brothers. Let's talk this out. I ignored them all, but they didn't stop. My parents even showed up at my apartment one evening, banging on the door like debt collectors. I stayed silent, watching through the peephole as they stood there, their voices muffled but their disappointment clear. Michael, this is ridiculous, my father said. You're acting like a child. Please, honey, my mother added, her tone softer. We just want to talk. Talk? About what? How I should forgive Ethan because family is everything. How I should support Lily because she was going through a difficult time. I didn't open the door. Eventually, they left, but their presence lingered like a bad smell. I wish I could say their harassment ended there, but it didn't. They started calling my workplace, leaving messages with the receptionist, and even sending emails under the guise of checking in. It was relentless, a constant reminder that even in my attempt to escape, they still had their claws in me. The breaking point came a few weeks later. I was at the gym, one of the few places I could clear my head, when Ethan walked in. He sauntered over like nothing had happened, his usual cocky demeanor intact. Michael, he called out, grinning as if we were long-lost friends. We need to talk. I ignored him, focusing on my workout. But Ethan, being Ethan, didn't take the hint. He leaned against the equipment I was using, blocking my view. Come on, man. Don't be like this. Go away, Ethan, I said through gritted teeth, trying to keep my composure. Look, I know you're mad, but this is getting ridiculous, he said, his tone annoyingly casual. You can't just cut me out of your life. We're brothers. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I stood up, my fists clenched at my sides. You think this is about being mad? I hissed, my voice low and dangerous. You destroyed my relationship, Ethan. You ruined my life. And you have the audacity to act like this is some petty grudge? He rolled his eyes. It wasn't just me, you know. Lily made her choices too. That was it. Without thinking, I swung. My fist connected with his jaw, the satisfying crack of impact momentarily drowning out my anger. Ethan stumbled back, clutching his face, but I wasn't done. Years of frustration, resentment, and betrayal came pouring out as I lunged at him again. "Michael, stop!" someone shouted, but I couldn't. Not until the gym staff pulled us apart, dragging me away as Ethan smirked through his bleeding lip. The aftermath was predictable. Ethan, ever the opportunist, pressed charges for assault. I spent the next few days tangled in legal drama, explaining to my lawyer why I had broken the restraining order I'd filed against my own family. The irony wasn't lost on me. The judge was lenient, recognizing Ethan's role in provoking me, but the incident left me feeling more defeated than ever. I had been trying to rebuild, to distance myself from the toxicity of my family, and yet here I was, dragged back into their chaos. Back at my apartment, I stared at the restraining order paperwork, my anger simmering beneath the surface. My family had pushed me to the edge, and now they were trying to pull me under. But I wouldn't let them. That night, I made a decision. This wasn't about cutting ties anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. I couldn't keep letting their presence, their voices, their manipulation, dictate my emotions. It was time to move forward, even if it meant leaving everything I'd ever known behind. The restraining order felt like a hollow victory. While the judge had ruled in my favor, declaring that my family's constant harassment needed to stop, it didn't feel like much had changed. My parents were nothing if not persistent. Ethan? He was a different beast entirely. He thrived on chaos, feeding off the drama like it was oxygen. The first violation came just a week after the ruling. My mother showed up at my office unannounced, carrying a photo album of old family pictures as if nostalgia would somehow erase the damage. I was in the middle of a team meeting when the receptionist buzzed in to let me know she was in the lobby. "Tell her I'm not available," I said curtly. Minutes later, she burst into the office anyway, clutching the album to her chest like a lifeline. The embarrassment hit me like a wave as my colleagues turned to look at the commotion. "Michael, you can't keep ignoring us," she cried, her voice trembling with desperation. "We're your family. We love you." I stood there, frozen between rage and humiliation. "Mom, you need to leave. Now." But she didn't. Instead, she opened the album, flipping through pages of childhood photos. "Look at these," she said, her voice breaking. "You and Ethan were so close. What happened to my boys?" "What happened?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What happened is standing right here, Mom. You let Ethan get away with everything, no matter who he hurt. And now you want me to act like it's all fine? Like he didn't destroy my life?" "Michael, this is ridiculous," she said, her tone shifting from pleading to scolding. "You're being stubborn. This isn't who you are." "Who I am," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Who I am is someone who's done being manipulated. Get out." Security escorted her out, but the damage was done. My colleagues avoided my gaze for the rest of the day, and I could feel the whispers behind my back. The incident left a sour taste in my mouth, a stark reminder of how deep my family's influence still ran. They couldn't let go, and neither, it seemed, could I. The second violation was more direct, and far worse. Ethan decided to test the limits of the restraining order by showing up at my gym again, this time with his smugness turned up to 11. I spotted him as soon as I walked in, his presence like a thorn in my side. "Michael," he said, grinning as if we were old friends, "you can't avoid me forever." My hands clenched into fists, the memory of our last encounter flashing in my mind. "Get out," I said through gritted teeth. "You're not supposed to be here." "Relax," he said, spreading his arms wide. "I'm just here to talk." "You're violating a court order," I snapped. "You've got 30 seconds before I call the police." Ethan's grin faltered, but only slightly. "Come on, man. Don't do this." I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed the police right in front of him. His expression shifted to something resembling panic as I gave the dispatcher the details. By the time the officers arrived, Ethan's bravado had melted away, replaced by feigned innocence. "I just wanted to talk to my brother," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Is that a crime?" "Yes, Ethan," I said coldly. It is. The officers took him into custody, and while watching him get handcuffed should have felt like a victory, it left me hollow. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about the years of damage, the endless cycle of enabling and betrayal, and the realization that no amount of legal action could erase the pain they had caused. The emotional toll was relentless. Every day felt like a battle, to maintain my composure at work, to fend off intrusive thoughts, to stop myself from replaying every interaction with my family. Therapy became my refuge, the one place where I could unload the weight of it all without judgment. My therapist, a kind but no-nonsense woman named Dr. Hayes, helped me see what I had been avoiding for years. "You're carrying their guilt," she said during one session, her voice steady. "It's not yours to bear." "But they keep dragging me back in," I argued. "Every time I think I'm free, they find a way to pull me under." She nodded thoughtfully. "And you've been letting them." Setting boundaries isn't just about telling people no. It's about enforcing those boundaries and protecting your peace, no matter how much it hurts. Protecting my peace. The phrase stuck with me, a mantra I repeated to myself whenever the guilt crept in. It wasn't easy, but I started taking steps to create real distance. I changed my phone number, ensuring my parents and Ethan couldn't contact me. I informed my office security to turn away anyone claiming to be a relative. And when Ethan's lawyer tried to argue that I had provoked him at the gym, I didn't back down. My lawyer countered with the restraining order, the police reports, and the mounting evidence of their harassment. The case was dismissed, and Ethan was hit with another violation. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about survival. I couldn't go back to the life I had before, where their needs and demands overshadowed my own. I had to move forward, even if it meant leaving everything behind. That realization was bittersweet, but it was also liberating. I had spent so long trying to fit into a family that never truly saw me. Now, I was finally starting to see myself. The decision to transfer to Seattle came on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. My boss called me into her office, a move I initially assumed was about the latest quarterly review. Instead, she handed me a folder and said, "There's an opportunity in our Seattle branch, Michael. It's a lateral move, but it's yours if you want it." The timing couldn't have been more perfect. My life in the city had become untenable. Everywhere I went, I felt the shadows of my family lurking. My mother's surprise office visits, Ethan's calculated gym ambushes, even the strained conversations with mutual acquaintances who didn't know which side to take. I needed a clean slate, a place where I could breathe again. "I'll take it," I said without hesitation. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Packing up my apartment, sorting through belongings, tying up loose ends. It was a bittersweet process. I found old photos tucked away in drawers, reminders of a life I was leaving behind. Some I kept, others I tossed. But each decision felt like shedding another layer of the past. Of course, my family couldn't let me go without one last attempt to pull me back. The restraining order had done little to deter them. My parents showed up at my building the night before the movers arrived, standing outside with matching expressions of desperation. "Michael, please," my mother said as I stepped outside to load a box into my car. "Don't do this. Don't abandon your family." I stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm choosing myself for once." My father crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "You're running away. That's all this is. Running away because you can't handle the real world." I laughed bitterly. "The real world?" I echoed. "You mean the world where Ethan gets to ruin my life, and you expect me to forgive him? The world where my feelings don't matter unless they benefit someone else? No, Dad. I'm done with that." My mother reached for my arm, her voice breaking. "We're your parents, Michael. We love you." "Then start acting like it," I said, stepping back. "You've spent my entire life enabling Ethan and ignoring me. I'm not asking you to change. I know you won't. But I can't keep living like this. I won't." They didn't have a response. For the first time, I saw something resembling understanding in my mother's eyes. But it was too little, too late. I turned and walked back inside, locking the door behind me. The next morning, they were gone, but the weight of that final encounter stayed with me. It wasn't closure, but it was as close as I was going to get. Seattle felt like a different world when I arrived. The air was cooler, the skyline unfamiliar, and the anonymity intoxicating. No one here knew about my family's dysfunction, my failed engagement, or the years of resentment I carried. I was just Michael, a blank slate with a chance to start over. Settling into my new life wasn't easy. The first few nights in my new apartment were eerily quiet, the silence amplifying the ache of loneliness. But I reminded myself why I had come here: to escape, to heal, to rebuild. Meanwhile, Ethan was playing the victim on social media, spinning a narrative where he was the wrong party and I was the unhinged brother who couldn't handle a little mistake. His posts were nauseatingly manipulative, filled with faux sincerity and phrases like, "Family is everything," even when they don't see it. Lily, predictably, chimed in with her own contributions. She flaunted her pregnancy online, posting photos of her growing belly with captions like, "Every child is a blessing, no matter the circumstances." It was as if they were determined to rewrite the story, erasing the pain they'd caused me and painting themselves as protagonists in some twisted love story. I blocked them both, but snippets of their posts still found their way to me through mutual acquaintances. Some people reached out to express sympathy, others to question why I couldn't just let it go. I stopped responding to those messages, unwilling to justify my choices to people who would never understand. The harassment wasn't entirely virtual. My parents, still clinging to the hope of reconciliation, sent me emails and letters begging me to return to the family. Each one was a gut punch, a reminder of how deeply their manipulation ran. I forwarded them to my lawyer, who reassured me that the restraining order was still in effect. Despite all this, Seattle began to feel like home. I threw myself into my work, focusing on the projects that had brought me here in the first place. My colleagues were kind but respectful of my boundaries, a stark contrast to the suffocating dynamic I'd left behind. I started therapy again, this time with a new counselor who helped me navigate the complexities of grief, not just for the life I'd lost, but for the family I had always wished for but never truly had. Grieving doesn't mean giving up hope, she told me during one session. It means accepting what is and finding peace with it. That peace felt elusive at times, but I was determined to find it. Each day was a small step forward, a reminder that healing wasn't a straight line but a winding path. The noise of my past was still there, but it was growing quieter, fading into the background as I built something new. Seattle wasn't just a city, it was a lifeline. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. Moving to Seattle gave me the distance I desperately needed, but it didn't erase the scars. The pain of betrayal and years of being overshadowed by Ethan didn't vanish just because I changed my zip code. It lingered like a shadow, darkening the edges of every new experience. But slowly, I started to find my footing again. Then Emma reached out. Lily's younger sister had always been different. She was quiet, observant, and far less enamored with Ethan than most people seemed to be. When I saw her name flash on my phone screen one evening, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep my new life insulated from the wreckage I'd left behind. But curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. "Michael," she said, her voice tentative but warm. "I hope I'm not bothering you." "No, it's fine," I replied, though my tone was cautious. "What's going on?" I wanted to apologize," she said, "for everything Lily did to you, for how my family enabled it. It wasn't right." Her words caught me off guard. I hadn't expected an apology, especially not from someone who wasn't directly involved. "You don't need to apologize for her actions," I said. "That's not on you." "Maybe not," she admitted, "but I feel like someone needs to acknowledge how wrong it was. You didn't deserve any of it." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of validation. Someone else had seen the injustice, the betrayal, and wasn't trying to justify it. Emma went on to tell me that she had distanced herself from Lily after learning the truth. "She's acting like this is some fairy tale," Emma said, her frustration evident. "Like she and Ethan are star-crossed lovers instead of two selfish people who destroyed someone else's life." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. That sounds about right. Emma began providing updates, not because I had asked for them, but because she seemed to think I deserved to know. Ethan was doing what he always did, charming his way through life while avoiding any real consequences. He and Lily were still together, posting nauseatingly curated photos online and basking in the attention of people who bought into their narrative. Your parents are enabling them, Emma added. Again, I sighed, the familiar weight of disappointment settling on my chest. Of course they are. They always have. She hesitated before speaking again. They've been telling people that you had a breakdown, that you overreacted to everything and cut ties because you couldn't handle reality. The words stung, even though I wasn't surprised. It was exactly the kind of story my parents would spin, one that made them look blameless and painted me as the problem. I should have expected that, I said, my voice heavy. It's easier for them to believe I'm unstable than to admit they failed as parents. Emma was quiet for a moment before she said, "For what it's worth, I don't believe them. I think you're the only one in this mess who's done the right thing." Her support, though unexpected, was a balm to my fractured confidence. It reminded me that not everyone bought into the lies my family spread, that there were still people who saw the truth. Meanwhile, my lawyer continued fighting the assault charges Ethan had pressed against me. It was a tedious process, one that dredged up old wounds every time I had to recount the incident. But my lawyer was relentless, building a case that highlighted Ethan's provocation and repeated violations of the restraining order. The legal battles weren't just about defending myself. They were about reclaiming my power. For so long, I had felt like a pawn in my family's twisted dynamics, but now I was taking a stand. It was exhausting, but it was necessary. Despite the chaos, Seattle offered moments of peace. I found solace in the small routines of my new life. Morning runs along the waterfront, evenings spent exploring local coffee shops, and weekends hiking trails that reminded me how vast and beautiful the world could be. Therapy helped, too. My sessions became a safe space to process the anger and sadness I still carried, to unpack years of feeling unseen and unvalued. One day, after a particularly cathartic session, I sat in my apartment and wrote a letter to my family. Not to send, but for myself. I wrote down everything I'd wanted to say for years. The pain of being overlooked, the resentment of always being second to Ethan, the betrayal of their unwavering loyalty to him despite everything he'd done. When I finished, I didn't feel lighter, but I felt clearer. The words were out of my head and on the page, and that was enough. As for Emma, she became an unexpected ally. We stayed in touch, her updates a mix of catharsis and closure. She didn't sugarcoat anything but offered a perspective that was both honest and compassionate. "You deserve better," she said during one conversation, "and I hope you find it." Her words stuck with me. I wasn't there yet, but I was starting to believe it. For the first time in years, I could see the faint outlines of a future that wasn't defined by my family's toxicity or Lily's betrayal. It wasn't clear or certain, but it was mine. Packing up my life for the move to Seattle had been one thing. Packing up my emotions and letting go of the past was an entirely different challenge. Every box I taped shut and every item I donated or discarded back then had felt symbolic, as though I was closing chapters one never wanted to read again. But the truth was, my past wasn't as easy to pack away as the belongings I left behind. The call from my cousin Amy came at just the right time. Amy had always been the black sheep of the family, outspoken about the favoritism our parents showered on Ethan and unafraid to call out their double standards. Unlike most of the family, she wasn't buying into the narrative that I had lost my mind. "Michael," she said, her voice warm but firm, "I heard about everything, and I just want to say I'm proud of you for walking away. That takes guts." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd felt like I was fighting this battle alone, but Amy's support reminded me that not everyone in the family had turned a blind eye. She even offered to fly out to Seattle and help me finish settling in, which I gratefully accepted. Amy's arrival brought a sense of familiarity that wasn't tied to pain. As we unpacked boxes and rearranged furniture, she filled the air with stories about her latest adventures and biting commentary on the family drama I'd left behind. "Do you know what your parents told Aunt Helen?" she asked one evening as we sat on the floor, eating takeout straight from the cartons. I shook my head. "Let me guess, they're still playing the Michael had a breakdown card?" "Bingo," she said, rolling her eyes. "And Ethan?" He's milking it for all it's worth. Apparently, he's painting himself as the misunderstood hero who tried to reach out, but was cruelly shut out. Of course he is, I muttered. It's textbook Ethan. Amy leaned back against the couch, her expression serious. I hope you know you don't owe them anything, Michael. Not your forgiveness, not your time. Nothing. They chose Ethan over you, and they've made it clear they'll keep doing it. Her words echoed something my therapist had said, that letting go wasn't about giving up hope, but about releasing myself from the expectation that they'd ever change. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was one I needed to take. With Amy's help, I blocked Lily and Ethan from every avenue of communication. Phone, email, social media, everything. My parents were already blocked, but she double-checked for any potential loopholes. You're not just building a new life, she said, her tone firm. You're building a fortress. Once the blocks were in place, I sat at my desk and stared at the last box I had yet to unpack. It was filled with old letters, photos, and keepsakes, things I'd held onto out of some misguided sense of nostalgia. I pulled out a photo of me and Ethan as kids, grinning ear to ear in matching Halloween costumes. I felt a pang of sadness, not for the present, but for the potential that had been lost along the way. I thought about throwing it all away, but instead, I sealed the box and labeled it "Do Not Open." It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about acknowledging it without letting it define me. That box would stay tucked away, a relic of a life I had left behind. The final goodbyes weren't spoken. They didn't need to be. Blocking their access to me was my goodbye, my way of reclaiming control. For too long, their words, their actions, and their choices had dictated my life. Not anymore. As I sat in the quiet of my apartment that evening, a strange sense of peace washed over me. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was something close. A lightness I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I wasn't weighed down by the constant push and pull of guilt, resentment, and unmet expectations. Amy left a few days later, but not before giving me one last piece of advice. Take your time, she said as we hugged goodbye. Healing isn't linear, and it isn't fast, but you're on the right track. Don't forget that. I nodded, her words sinking in. For years, I had been running on autopilot, driven by the need to prove my worth to people who couldn't see it. Now, I was finally starting to live for myself. The bitterness of the past hadn't disappeared. It probably never would, but it had shifted. It no longer consumed me the way it once did. Instead, it became a quiet reminder of where I'd been and how far I'd come. Letting go wasn't a single act. It was a process, one I was still in the middle of. But for the first time, I felt like I was moving forward. And that was enough. Seattle had started to feel like home. There was a peace to it, an unspoken freedom in the anonymity of the city. No one here knew the details of my family drama. No one knew about the betrayal that had nearly destroyed me, and no one cared to. The distance had given me space to breathe, to think, and, most importantly, to heal. It wasn't easy. Healing never is. There were moments, especially during quiet nights when the rain tapped against my window, that I found myself thinking of Lily and Ethan, wondering how they were doing. The thought was fleeting, almost intrusive, but it was still there. And when it came, I would remind myself, they are not my concern anymore. The healing didn't happen all at once, and it certainly wasn't linear. Some days I felt like I was making progress, only for something to trigger a memory that dragged me backward. But that was part of it, wasn't it? Part of learning to live with the pain, to acknowledge it without letting it control my every move. Therapy had become a vital part of my life. Dr. Hayes was no longer just someone I saw to unload my thoughts, but a guide helping me navigate the complexities of self-worth and forgiveness. Through her, I began to understand something that had eluded me for years, that my worth was never tied to my family's approval. It wasn't about Ethan's success or my parents' favoritism. It was about me, and I had every right to claim that. Work had become a refuge, not because it was easy, but because it was something I could control. I poured myself into my career, the projects I led, and the people I worked with. In the chaos of deadlines and meetings, I found solace. I didn't have to think about the past or the people who had hurt me. I could just focus on the task at hand, and for a while that was enough. And then there was therapy. I continued to unpack my feelings, sometimes with raw, unrelenting honesty. In one of those sessions, Dr. Hayes asked a question that stuck with me. What would it look like if you forgave yourself? Forgiveness was a concept I had struggled with. Not just forgiving others, but forgiving myself. How could I forgive myself for staying too long? For letting myself be manipulated? For allowing my worth to be defined by others? How could I forgive myself for not walking away sooner? The answer wasn't something I could wrap up neatly. But what I learned in that moment was that forgiveness wasn't about excusing anyone's behavior, least of all my own. It was about releasing the hold that guilt and resentment had on me. I had been angry at myself for letting it go on for so long, but there was no use in continuing to carry that burden. I deserved peace, too. The weeks turned into months, and Seattle, once a city of anonymity, began to feel like a place where I could finally live without fear of judgment. I was meeting new people, making friends, real friends, the kind who saw me for who I was, not the version of me that existed in the shadow of my family's expectations. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I had made the right choice, if my anger had been justified, if I had truly left the past behind. But with each passing day, I became more certain that I had. I was building something new, something that had nothing to do with the old expectations or the people who had always treated me as less than. As I stood at my apartment window one evening, watching the city light up beneath me, I realized something profound. My future wasn't defined by the past. I wasn't destined to repeat the mistakes of my family. I was carving my own path, and for the first time in years, that path seemed bright. Healing, I realized, wasn't about forgetting. It wasn't about erasing the pain or pretending it didn't exist. It was about moving forward, learning from the past, and finding strength in the places that had once felt like brokenness. The betrayal, the anger, the isolation, they had all shaped me, but they no longer had the power to define me. I was free, not because I had outrun my past, but because I had accepted it, acknowledged it, and refused to let it control me anymore. I was writing my own story now, and the chapters were mine to craft. There would be new challenges, new struggles, and new heartbreaks, but they wouldn't define me. I had survived the worst, and now I was ready for whatever came next. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine a future, one not shaped by my family's drama, but by my own choices. It was uncertain, but it was mine, and that was enough.